Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Rođen u Jerusalimu kao sin poznatog izraelskog generala, ima jedinstvenu perspektivu koja je oblikovala njegovu posvećenost pronalaženju održivog mira između Palestine i Izraela. Gost emisije Recite Al Jazeeri je Miko Peled, istaknuti izraelsko-američki aktivista za mir i pravdu. Poznat po svom snažnom zagovaranju za palestinska prava i mirno rješenje izraelsko-palestinskog sukoba. Mr. Peled, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkan channel, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, let me start by asking you about your personal journey and how you became involved in advocating for Palestinian rights, but also for peace between the Palestinians and Israelis.
Well, thank you for inviting me to do this interview. I was born and raised in Jerusalem, and to a very prominent, patriotic Israeli Zionist family. And my father was a general in the Israeli military in 1967. My grandfather signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence, and I had many other members of the family who held important positions. We had a great uncle who was a president, and so on. So I was born I was raised and grew up to be a very proud Israeli, a proud Zionist. And it wasn't until much later in life that I embarked on what I call in my book and my memoir, The General Son, the subtitle is Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. So I embarked on this journey and discovered that there was a Palestine, because as an Israeli, you don't know that there's a Palestine. You only know that there's an Israel, and you think it's all Israel. But gradually I discovered that there's a whole other people there, and they live in a different reality completely. And so I took this journey into that reality, which for an Israeli is considered very dangerous, because we are taught that they want to kill us, that they're murderers, they're terrorists, and that sort of thing. But eventually I came to realize that it wasn't they who were the dangerous foreigners, but we, the Israelis, who are the dangerous foreigners. We are the settlers. We are the ones who have imposed violence. We are the ones that brought terrorism to Palestine. And we are the ones that imposed an apartheid regime. Now, I didn't know, at first, I didn't know the terminology, but I remember as a child just driving through Palestinian towns and Palestinian neighborhoods and seeing the difference and realizing we did not live the same lives. We did not have the same rights. We did not have the same privileges. Even as a boy, I could see it. But of course, later on, once I took this journey, I realized it was apartheid, and I realized that the violence that exists in Palestine was brought by us and is caused by my side, which of course is a very difficult, very painful realization.
Yeah, I was wondering how your family reacted to your journey.
Well, look, there are different people in my family who had similar journeys, who had similar journeys themselves, perhaps not to the extent that I did. But, my father himself, after he retired from the military, promoted the idea of the two-state solution. This is right after the 1967 war. Of course, Israel was engaged in building massively for Jews only in the newly conquered territories, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and so on. But he promoted the idea of the two-state solution and Palestinian rights, granted within the limitations of the Zionist construct. Later on, sadly, in 1997, or tragically, my sister's little girl was killed by Palestinians in a suicide attack in Jerusalem. And she reached out and said, Israel is responsible for the death of my child, just like Israel is responsible for the death of so many Palestinian children. So everybody, there's several people in my family that had taken journeys in this direction. Like I said, granted, not all of them have taken quite the extent, not quite to the extent that I have.
Right. When you say that Israel is an apartheid state, I mean, these words carry significant weight. I mean, I was wondering, even professors based in top-notch American universities are very careful when describing Israel using such terminology. I was wondering whether you faced any backlash from fellow Israelis.
Well, certainly Israelis don't like to be told that they are living in an apartheid regime and that they actually established an apartheid regime. They like to believe they live in a democracy, but that's because they exist within their own bubble. They exist within the sphere of Israeli Jews who are the privileged side of the apartheid state, just like I was. You know, when you're on the privileged side of the apartheid, you don't know that it's an apartheid necessarily. And when you see the differences, you ignore them because it's very convenient.
Right.
And you believe the stories that you're told that the other side is backward and the other side is a little less civilized, and you know all the kind of racist characterizations that typically racist societies of settler colonial that are settler colonial societies always perpetuate against the other. But you know, never mind what I say, never mind what Palestinians have been claiming for decades. Amnesty International last year came out with a very, very detailed and very comprehensive report claiming clearly that Israel has been engaged in the crime of apartheid since it was established. So what I say, you know, I certainly figured this out a long time ago. Palestinians have been saying this even longer, but now Amnesty International, I mean, you can't be more credible than that, did very thorough research for several years and came out with this very, very clear report. And by the way, the report also has recommendations how to combat the apartheid state and what other countries and what non-governmental organizations should do in order to combat the apartheid regime.
How do you make sense of the fact that Israel gets unambiguous support from every major Western democracy?
Well, the Zionist movement has, you know, for a very long, over 100 years, been engaged in a very, very comprehensive, well-planned, strategic campaign of public relations. And there's no body, there's no organization that has done this for Palestinians. So obviously, if you have one side promoting their argument in a very comprehensive, well-funded, well-planned manner, and no one is presenting an argument to counter that, then you know it makes perfect sense that the West and the Americans, and actually not only them, you know, today the African countries, the larger parts of Asia, China, Russia, I mean, they're all supporting Israel. They're all standing with Israel. Maybe now they're a little bit more careful, but basically have good relations with Israel. So, but that's what happens when only one side has the campaign, and not only a campaign, but a very effective campaign, and has been doing it, like I said, for over 100 years. So it's a very easy calculation. This is precisely why Israel is getting the support that it's getting.
Right, but how come there's no equivalent Palestinian or Arab pressure group or lobby organization that advocates for the rights of Palestine and an independent and free Palestinian state?
That's a very good question. I mean, partly it's because the Zionists have been pushing very strongly as part of their campaign to demonize Arabs and Muslims. And then when the state of Israel was established, then the apartheid state managed to fragment Palestinian society, fragment the Palestinian political world, so that there was never really a cohesive voice. There was never a cohesive organization that supported the cause and could explain the cause. And so what happens is you have the international community looking, and particularly the West, looking at Israel as the symbol of civilization, symbol of the West, symbol of white supremacy, if you will. And then you've got the Arabs who are disorganized and seem like they're violent and perhaps not as civilized. And again, all the racist tropes that go with it. So there's several reasons why it hasn't happened, but the bottom line is that when you have such a strong campaign demonizing the other and then making sure to fragment the other on the ground, this is what you get.
Right. When you say that Israel is a racist state, is Israel being racist only towards Palestinians, or is it being racist towards African and East European or Sephardi Jews?
Well, Israel is a racist. Racism doesn't have boundaries. A racist society is a racist society. So when the Arab Jews came in the 50s, they were Arabs. So they were treated like Arabs. And there's a very good book out now by the historian Avi Schleim, memoir. And he talks about that, what it was like to be a boy coming from Iraq and a family who came from Iraq forced to come, but I won't get into that. And what it was like growing up, how it was very clear that policies regarding education, policies regarding employment, policies regarding any kind of development discriminated against what is known as the Arab Jews, because they were Arabs and therefore they didn't need to go to secondary school, and they were Arabs, and so therefore all they could do really is menial work. They cannot do anything beyond that, even though a great deal of the communities that came from the Arab countries were, highly educated, highly successful people. But that didn't matter, because in the eyes of the Zionist establishment, they were Arabs. And then later on, much later on, when Ethiopian Jews came, or Jews from Africa came.
That was exactly my question. Was the Zionist movement dominated by white Ashkenazi European Jews?
Oh, absolutely, without question. And today, the African Jews are suffering from that, and the African asylum seekers are suffering for that same kind of racism, of course.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Peled, I was wondering, can one be Jewish without subscribing to the principles of Zionism and vice versa?
Of course, Zionism is the antithesis of Judaism. It's the nemesis of Judaism. Zionism is a secular, racist political movement, political ideology and movement that established a racist, violent state that couldn't be farther removed from what it means to be Jewish. In fact, according to Jewish law, Zionism is a violation of Jewish law, because according to Jewish law, Jews are prohibited from sovereignty in the Holy Land, if we're talking about theology. But besides that, I mean, the two most important precepts in Judaism are not to murder and not to steal. And Zionism and the state of Israel have been engaged in stealing and murdering for 75 years. That's their almost the entire existence.
Right, but why does the state of Israel try to always equate Zionism with Judaism? And any criticism of Israel is very quickly dismissed as a form of anti-Semitism.
This has been part of the Zionist campaign from the very beginning, because when the Zionists came out, the Jews opposed it. Jews rejected it. Orthodox Jews rejected it. Religious Jews, and intellectuals rejected it, and so on. So they did not have a lot of support. And gradually, they developed this campaign that said, if you don't support Zionism, then you're either not a real Jew, or if you're not a Jew at all, then you're an anti-Semite. And now they've been really upping this campaign. I mean, this campaign is very strong now, because what people around the world are realizing is that Zionism is a racist ideology. So in order to combat that, they're saying, well, if you say we're racists, then you're anti-Semitic, because now you're calling all Jews racists. So conflating Zionism with Judaism has been a big part of the Zionist PR campaign, and it's working. People are afraid today to criticize or reject Zionism for fear of being called anti-Semitic, and most people don't really know, nuanced differences. But if you talk to any, I'll give you an example. In the year 1900, Zionism was, just a new movement.
Right.
And all the most important rabbis of the world published a book, which they, compiled articles. And basically they said, the idea of Zionism, the idea of a Jewish state, will bring violence to the Holy Land. It will ruin the good relations between Jews and Muslims and Arabs, and will cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jews in all the countries in which they live, because Jews live, across the world as a religious minority. And those three things that's exactly what happened. So conflating Zionism with Judaism is actually anti-Semitic, in my opinion, because it's blaming all Jewish people for being racist and violent, which is what Zionism is. So rather than saying rejection of Zionism is anti-Semitism, I would say accepting Zionism is like accepting anti-Semitism, because it's a racist ideology. Just like anti-Semitism, just like Islamophobia, just like all other forms of white supremacy, Zionism belongs in that column of racist ideologies.
How do proponents of Judaism and Zionism address the challenges and complexities of balancing religious identity, political aspirations, and the pursuit of peace?
Well, Israel and Zionism never pursued peace. Peace was never part of their agenda. So we can take that off the table right off the bat. Supremacy was on their agenda military supremacy, political supremacy, control of the region, being the toughest, meanest bully, if you will, in the region was the most important strategic objective from the very beginning. And so peace does not go hand in hand with that. So that's one thing. Now, in terms of the identity, Zionism has nothing to do with religion. It's a secular ideology, and it was promoted by secular people. Today, what we see in certain parts of Israeli society, we see Jewish people who dress like Orthodox Jews, but are actually fanatic Zionists, fanatic racists. So it's easy to confuse them with actually, real Orthodox Jews who are authentically Jewish. But Israeli society in general is a fragmented society. It's not really a society. It's a group of people that are being held by tape or something. It's barely being held together by tape. And at any moment, that society can fall apart, and it's very near falling apart, as we've seen over the last, I would say, year, but even more so now. So the differences within the society are not just political, although politically on the issue of Palestine, there's a consensus. But in terms of religious identity, in terms of racial identity, in terms of the economic and socioeconomic structure, there are a lot of gaps, and it's a very fragmented society.
Right. Now let's move on to very briefly to what is happening currently in Gaza. Israel has began almost annihilating parts of northern Gaza. What is the end goal of the Israeli army?
Well, it's hard to say what the end goal is, because what we're seeing now is acts of pure revenge. This savagery that we're seeing, this attack on Gaza that we're seeing is revenge. It's revenge by a country that was humiliated and now is trying to seek revenge by murdering, killing and attacking the weakest people on earth, perhaps. We saw on October 7th a relatively small group of fighters, Palestinian fighters, coming out of the most oppressed, maybe the poorest places on earth, and completely debilitating and not to say paralyzing the state of Israel for weeks. So that was a humiliating blow for the state of Israel, who likes to see itself as capable, who likes to see itself as master of, having this master of military and master of intelligence capabilities. And all of this was proven to be absolutely false. So now, in order to somehow gain some kind of their pride back, they are lashing out at defenseless Palestinians. And as we know, they've killed many, many thousands, and the destruction is horrible. I don't think there's a strategic goal here. I think it's just pure killing for the sake of killing, for the sake of revenge. At the end of the day, there will be a ceasefire. At the end of the day, Israel will have to deal with the fact that it's an apartheid state, that it's governing, millions of people without rights. And one would hope that this particular case right now that we're seeing of rage and savagery will show the world what Israel is really about. And we've seen several states already call back their diplomatic missions and close the Israeli missions in their countries. Hopefully other countries will follow.
Right.
But that will bring...
Yeah, go on, sir. Go on.
I'm saying hopefully if this follows, then there will be a kind of diplomatic and international pressure on the state of Israel to dismantle the apartheid state.
Right. But if Israel claims to be fighting Hamas in the West Bank, in Gaza, how does Israel explain its constant arrests and killings of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank, which is ruled by the Palestinian Authority, which is on very bad terms with Hamas?
Israel doesn't have to explain anything to anybody, because it gets away with doing whatever it likes. The excuse that Israel is killing Palestinians in Gaza because of Hamas is absolutely ridiculous. And like you said, they're killing and arresting thousands in the West Bank, and they are harassing Palestinian citizens of Israel and arresting them. So, but they don't have to answer to anyone, so they don't explain it. They say these are terrorists and these are terrorists, and everybody to them is a terrorist. Anybody who stands up, any Palestinian who stands up. They just arrested the daughter of a good friend of mine, Ahit Tamimi, 22-year-old girl who never held a gun, who never hurt anyone, who I've known myself since she was a little girl. Her father has been just given 6 months administrative detention, which means no trial, no charges. And she was just arrested, and we know for sure that she's being interrogated and tortured as we speak. She's never hurt anybody, and she couldn't, I mean, she's a 22-year-old student.
Right, but
So
she's an icon of Palestinian resistance.
She became an icon when she slapped a soldier, and of course she did something that many people wish they had done in her stead. But she's a young lady that wants to live a normal life, and these soldiers keep coming into her village, killing her family, arresting her family members. I don't know how many times that family home has been destroyed from the inside by soldiers who have raided them. That's been her whole life. And yet she's never hurt anyone, and she's the one that's being sent to jail right now. But nobody's asking the question. Nobody's questioning Israel why they're arresting and detaining and torturing children, why they're arresting and torturing thousands of political prisoners. And when the world is worried about the Israeli hostages held in Gaza, where were they when thousands of Palestinians are being held on a regular basis for decades by Israel? Where was the world then? These are not hostages. You're only a hostage if you're an Israeli Jew, but if you're a Palestinian, you're not a hostage when you're taken away like this, when you're a political prisoner. So the hypocrisy here is terrible, and hopefully this catastrophe in Gaza, this savagery that's being displayed by Israel, will help the world to wake up and say enough is enough. A life is a life. And I was like, I have to quote King Abdullah of Jordan, who said that Arabs are seeing now that in the eyes of the West, their lives do not matter. The lives of Arabs don't matter. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So hopefully the world will wake up to this and realize that they should not support Israel. They cannot, in good conscience, support the state of Israel anymore.
Right, but the Arab states are still very much fragmented. There's hardly any unity. We have seen no concrete concerted efforts taken by Arab states to pull back their ambassadors from Tel Aviv. Apart from condemnations, no concrete action has been taken against the state of Israel.
Well, I don't know what kind of action they can take. I mean, they don't have the military power to take action. They certainly express themselves in ways that are clear. And to be an Arab leader, you're faced with two choices. If you oppose America and oppose Israel, then you end up like Iraq or Syria or Libya or Yemen. And so if you care and you have a sense of responsibility for your people and your state, then you have to do what it takes in order to maintain the integrity of your state, of your people, or your country. So it's not an ideal situation to be in. It's a very difficult situation. And even with that, some of them have pulled their ambassadors back. And we see protests being held, everywhere throughout the Arab world. And this is the reality. Israel is the toughest, scariest bully in the neighborhood, and it's a very difficult position to be in when your neighbor is such an unpredictable, violent bully.
Right, Mr. Miko Peled, it was such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you once again for your time.
Thank you.